So after President Trump's announcement for ceasefire, Indian media especially, and then their policymakers and their certain office bearers, they criticized heavily and they said, no, it was not the reason that we went for the ceasefire. They had some other ideas in their mind. Do you think that it is Indian media or the hardliners that is influencing the Indian government's policy making?
Well, I mean, it certainly is notable that some of these very jingoistic Indian media outlets were making a lot of noise, and quite frankly, were being irresponsible and even dangerous during the height of the conflict with obviously blatantly fake news. And some of these media networks, they tend to reflect the government's position in India. So I'm not suggesting that there was any type of collusion, so to speak. But I think that one certainly has to look at this in its proper context. But yeah, I think that the ceasefire issue, I've heard convincing cases that India was pushing for it more. I've heard convincing cases that Pakistan was pushing for it more. But my sense is that even though tensions were so high, that May 9th, that late May 9th, early May 10th period, even though hostilities were so intense, I'd argue that by that point, both India and Pakistan felt comfortable essentially calling it a day and claiming victory and feeling comfortable selling that victory to their respective publics. And in that sense, I think that each side was ready to agree to a ceasefire, suggesting to me that the U.S. didn't actually have to try that hard to push the sides to get to a ceasefire, and may have been pushing at an open door. Yes, I mean, the U.S. certainly was engaged and active in trying to convey this message that you need to reach a ceasefire. But I definitely don't think that the U.S. was directly had to do a lot to really change the minds of the two sides, so to speak. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well, that India and Pakistan didn't necessarily need that really strong push from the U.S. or any external actor to get the two to agree to wind things down.
So, Michael, do you agree with this thesis that I'm about to narrate before you, that Narendra Modi is into a fix? Either he needs to please his core constituency in the name of anti-Pakistan slogans, or he got a chance to move on the economic fronts, where major international powers are willing to heavily invest in India economically. So, but he's in a fix. Either he needs to please his constituency or to opt the other way. How do you rate him and weigh him in this situation?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, we've seen that the Indian government has clearly decided that Pakistan bashing and hardline positions on Pakistan work out politically. I mean, we know in 2019, of course, the Pulwama Balakot crisis happened soon before the Indian elections, and Modi was really ramping up the anti-Pakistan rhetoric, so to speak, and that might well have figured in India's response. Of course, now in this most recent crisis, it was not election season in India, but still, I think that politically, the view in New Delhi is that there are clear benefits to taking those types of hardline positions against Pakistan. But I think it goes broader than that. This was a particularly egregious terrorist attack in India-administered Kashmir, unlike much of what we've seen in terms of terrible violence in that region. This targeted civilians, it targeted tourists. And as I understand it, there was a communal nature to it as well, with people being targeted for their Hindu faith. So, in that sense, there was tremendous pressure, public pressure, on Modi and the government in India to do something big, so to speak, rooted in this view, which of course is contested in Pakistan, that the attack was somehow linked to Pakistan. So I think that for Modi, there was a lot of pressure on him to respond, not necessarily because of this idea that Pakistan was linked to it somehow, again, the Indian position, but more so the fact that the terrorist attack was so egregious, and that there had to be some type of military retaliation against that external actor that was blamed for the attack by India. So, but you're right. I mean, I think moving forward, there will be a lot of pressure on Modi. I mean, the speech that he made soon after the ceasefire essentially promised an automatic and rapid and really strong, harsh response, military response against Pakistan whenever there's a terrorist attack in India. So that raises expectations from the Indian public, and it puts a lot of pressure on Modi not only to do exactly that, but to be successful, so to speak. And how you measure success is not very clear. So yeah, I mean he will face some significant pressure moving forward, but he still remains very popular, and I would argue that in India on the whole, the Indian military action, its airstrikes in Pakistan, were, applauded by across the board, not just those that support the government, but the opposition as well.
Right. So, Michael, do you think that this ceasefire will remain intact?
I think it should. It certainly is very fragile. I think it should. I don't think either side has an interest in breaking it. I mean, that would certainly raise the ire of the Trump administration, which I don't think either side wants right now. And India's government has been maybe a bit more detailed in its thinking on this. It's been, I think, a bit more. It has not been willing to call it a ceasefire. It said it's a pause. But Modi has essentially said that. Not that India would be inclined to start resuming military strikes on Pakistan, but that if India is hit by an attack, then it would respond, and very quickly and with a lot of muscle. Pakistan, of course, has been calling for dialogue. It's been calling for peace in the region and so on. So I think that, I hope I'm not wrong, I do think that the ceasefire should be able to hold, but I think the bigger and more concerning question is what becomes of the India-Pakistan relationship, which I would argue is tenser now than it has been in quite some time. And unlike in the past, when you see a pattern of a really serious crisis or a conflict between the two, leading to a situation where the two sides actually are able to relax tensions. After the 2019 crisis, 2 years after that, you had the LOC truce. But I'd argue that in this case, things are a lot different, and there's good reason to believe that this relationship will remain ice cold for quite some time.
Exactly. You were just talking about the public pressure on the Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of the India. But on the same time, I was just talking about the role played by the media on both sides. I'm sure, being an expert in South Asian affairs, you must have seen the role of the Indian media in particular. Quite a few sane voices in India, they were spreading fake news, including Barkha Dutt and others. And when I talk about their local media in Hindi language, unbelievable. They were just a classical example of warmongering, and they were just airing some fake news. How do you see Indian media's role in this hype, and in comparison with Pakistani media?
No, absolutely. I mean, the Indian media was especially loud and relentless in its disinformation. There were cases of disinformation on the Pakistani side too, but those I think were not as loud and numerous as what we saw with the Indian side. Absolutely. I mean, I think it was incredibly dangerous that at the very moment when hostilities were escalating to their highest level, a few hours before, this was late afternoon, early evening India time, that Friday night, May 9th, that's when you had the craziest examples of fake news. And as you suggest, some of these were coming from very prominent, well-known, and indeed well-regarded Indian journalists. And what strikes me is that these were so obviously untrue, right? I mean, claiming that Quetta had been taken over by the BLA, claims that the Pakistani army chief was arrested. Clearly, if these things really happened, there would be significant levels of media attention. So obviously false.
I mean, that is simply ridiculous.
Why would the Indian media resort to that type of thing? That's a story for another day. So absolutely, it's very dangerous. It's very concerning. But I would note that you did have, if you broaden this not just to the traditional media but to social media as well, there were some cases of disinformation from the Pakistani side as well, including some accounts that were claiming that Sikhs in the Indian army were defecting, things like that. But indeed, I think what stands out in this conflict, which had the most disinformation,
but Michael, you are right. But let me tell you honestly, you are right. You are right. I respect your opinion, and somehow you are right. But let me tell you honestly, there is no comparison between the amount of fake news that went on here on Indian media and the amount of fake news or misinformation or disinformation spread here in Pakistani media. As far as those social media accounts are concerned that you were citing, I can vouch for that those were not, responsible journalists, those were not known anchors or known political entities. Might be some random social media users who were driven by the misinformation. Unlike Indian side, where I can count on Barkha Dutt, Arnab Goswami, Republic TV, and etc.